South Sudan conflict enters its second year, with no end in sight. A popular Malawian music duo proves that the way to the audience's hearts is through their stomachs. And a chic monkey steals the show at a New York movie premiere. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. 1 year after political infighting in South Sudan deteriorated into a deadly national conflict, the parties appear no closer to silencing the guns and getting back to the business of building the world's youngest nation. From the United Nations, Voice of America's Margaret Bashir has more.
A year of fighting sparked by a political rivalry has killed thousands, possibly tens of thousands of South Sudanese. The country, which became independent in 2011, has also spiraled into a humanitarian crisis that the UN says has left half the population hungry and nearly 2 million displaced. Ongoing efforts by the regional bloc known as IGAD have not yet yielded a political solution to the fighting between President Salva Kiir and his former Vice President Riek Machar. UN peacekeeping chief Hervé Ladsus says international pressure must be intensified.
This has lasted too long. It has been too costly, and let's face it, the leaders have not shown much regard for the livelihood of their citizens.
The UN Security Council has repeatedly expressed its readiness to impose targeted sanctions if there's no end to hostilities, but so far has not acted. Ladsus, who has 11,000 peacekeepers in South Sudan trying to protect civilians, including 100,000 sheltering at UN protection sites, says it is for the Council to decide about sanctions, but that an arms embargo could help.
I think it is not normal that the oil revenue, which is still generated by the oil fields in the north, actually is used to buy military hardware and ammunition. That is simply not acceptable.
Human Rights Watch UN Director Philippe Boulepion agrees.
Well, we have a really perverse situation now where the international community is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to avert famine in the country, and meanwhile the government is using the oil money to buy more weapons that will in all likelihood continue to be used against civilians.
Boulepion visited South Sudan recently and said ethnic tensions in the capital, Juba, remain high, while crimes are committed with impunity.
A key factor of this conflict is that for months and months, leaders on both sides have been responsible for very serious crimes against civilians and have paid no price for it. There is no justice in the country for now.
The violence and resulting humanitarian disaster have forced the UN to abandon its efforts to help South Sudan build its state institutions and to focus only on responding to emergency needs. Until there is a lasting political settlement, the prospects for this young nation developing are dim. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Well, race relations in the United States are back on the global agenda after recent decisions not to indict police officers in the deaths of 2 African Americans in 2 distinctively different cases. Now, have the cases hurt America's image and its ability to project its values? VOA's Al Pearson reports from London.
The decisions in Ferguson, Missouri and New York City sparked widespread protests and global news coverage. Protests continued for days all around the United States and inspired support across the world, including at this protest in London. At the city's King's College, American Studies students have been talking about the issue in their classes.
It's not a good thing.
Chang is a 23-year-old economics student from China who has studied in the United States.
I mean, a lot of Chinese press, they said like, oh, in U.S., they always advocate the human rights, but look at them. It's like they have 2 standards of human rights.
These students study America, and all have visited. They see the incident in New York as a clear case of unpunished police brutality, but view the Ferguson incident as less clear-cut. 53-year-old master's degree student Paul Zimmerman of London says the details are not as important as the broader point.
There's an assumption that somehow there's something that's gone on that isn't quite right. Maybe they come to the right conclusion, but in a sense, that doesn't really matter.
24-year-old classmate Mark Eastwood from Northern England agrees.
I would say it's exposed a broader issue. It's more, for me, the story of Ferguson and what's happened in New York, in the last week or so, is more about the issues of as I said, structural racism.
There's also a sense of disappointment that the election of Barack Obama does not mean all of America's racial issues have been solved.
Electing a black president in theory is transformational, but there's a lot that needs to happen in order to correct many, many years of systemic unfairness.
One black president cannot change these things. They have to change their justice system, even their laws.
Their teacher, Joshua Simons, says some of his students see two aspects to the stories from Ferguson and New York.
They're thinking of it as a pretty shocking demonstration of the remaining racial injustices in the United States, and a pretty encouraging sign that the population of the United States isn't going to take these events lying down.
The emotional scenes of the funerals added to the public reaction overseas. Professor Simon says many people give the United States well-deserved credit for progress on race relations. But he says the recent incidents have shifted the focus to how much work remains to be done, while also making the U.S. aspiration to be a moral leader more difficult. Al Pessin, VOA News, London.
In a passionate speech in Washington this week, Britain's Prince William made a plea for the world to do more to tackle wildlife poaching and linked the problem to terrorism. Now, the Prince has long held an interest in conservation. He proposed to Kate Middleton while on holiday in a Kenyan game reserve. Here's Henry Ridgewell.
Illegal poaching for products like rhino horn and ivory has driven many iconic species close to extinction. In South Africa, conservationists say a record 1,020 rhinos have been killed in 2014 alone. The total population for the whole of Africa is estimated at just over 5,000. In his speech Monday, Prince William announced the formation of a task force to combat the trade.
Specifically designed to work with the transport industry, from airlines to shipping lines, to examine its role in the illegal wildlife trade and identify means by which the sector can break the chain between suppliers and consumers.
The Prince accused organised criminals of looting the planet to feed mankind's ignorant craving for exotic pets, trinkets, cures and ornaments.
Criminal gangs turn vast profits from the illegal killing or capture of wildlife. Armed groups and terrorists swap poached ivory for guns, and middlemen oil the wheels of the trade in return for reward.
That link between poaching and armed groups and terrorists is gaining increasing attention. In Kenya, in recent weeks, Islamist al-Shabaab militants based in Somalia have killed dozens of Kenyans in attacks on a bus and on non-Muslims working in a quarry. At a recent conference in London on conservation and security, Kenya's Secretary of State for the Environment said the two issues can be viewed through the same policy lens.
We share some very sensitive borders with countries such as Somalia, South Sudan, Ethiopia. Some of these problems have meant that we have faced increased levels of terrorism. And we do think that there is a connection to increased poaching.
The fledgling concept of treating security threats and poaching as problems with similar policies has become known as StableCon, stabilisation through conservation. Indigenous populations are central, explains the brainchild of StableCon, Ian Saunders, founder of the Kenyan Tsavo Trust.
To work at a human level to provide an area that is conducive to both wildlife and humans into perpetuity is vital for the stabilisation of Kenya and the future of Kenya and the future of many other countries.
Africa's wildlife draws millions of tourists, but Saunders argues that wildlife must be protected for reasons beyond tourism and that conservation can bring security. With poaching expanding at an alarming rate, the search for a solution is becoming ever more urgent. Henry Richwell for VOA News, London.
Well, for more insight on the fight against poaching, we're joined by Will Gatchell, a senior policy advisor of U.S. government relations at the World Wildlife Fund. Mr. Gatchell, welcome to Africa 54.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Now, in our report, there was, there was a sense in which it looks like poaching has been on the increase.
Yep.
But just today, I was seeing a report from Kenya, the authorities there saying the elephant population, for example, has increased up to about 35,000 and more compared to about 34,000 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So what is the overall picture? Are things getting really bad, or actually there's some improvement?
Well, I think it really depends on where you're looking. Obviously, Africa is a huge continent, and you've got 37 of the 54 countries have elephant populations. And some of those populations are in a different status from others. But we know that overall, the data shows that over the last 10 years, you've seen a steady increase in the amount of poaching for elephants. And in the last 5 years, there's been a huge spike. And so right now, the levels of poaching in Africa for ivory are unsustainable for elephant populations. Mm-hmm. We've seen in 2014 a significant decline from the previous 2 years, but those numbers were huge. So you've seen about 100,000 elephants killed in Africa over the course of 3 years. So we're starting to see a little bit of a trend in the right direction, but the numbers are still way too high.
Yeah. Interestingly, I've seen reports implying that since we started seeing a kind of a surge of the Chinese in Africa, there has been an increase of poaching, especially around the areas where they're involved in like road constructions, which gives makes one wonder: is the Chinese authorities being engaged effectively to stop this from their end?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that everyone recognizes that the reason that we're seeing this huge surge in poaching is because of demand for ivory in Asia, and primarily in China. The price for ivory on the street in China, by some reports, has tripled over the last couple of years. And so it's Chinese demand that is really causing the new surge, along with other countries like Thailand, where you have unregulated ivory markets. And so I think the issue is that you have, as Prince William pointed out, these transnational organized crime syndicates, criminal gangs, some of them Asian criminal gangs, that are moving into places in Africa where they can access ivory and move it on the black market. And so I think the Chinese role is critical. And what we've seen is that they have really started to engage on this issue. You saw Secretary of State John Kerry over in China back in the summer, standing there alongside Chinese officials talking about the need to address this problem. And I believe that the Chinese are starting conversations with their African counterparts too, how they can work together on this problem.
The terrorism angle, how big of a problem is that? That terrorists are cashing in on illegal poaching?
Well, I think that question of how big that problem is, is not entirely, the answer to that is not entirely clear, but we do know that it's playing a role. And I just looked to the U.S. government's intelligence services that released a report a year ago that said it is that the poaching of ivory and other high-value wildlife products like rhino horn is playing a significant role in helping to fund militant organizations, insurgencies. And then we know that, for example, in Central Africa, where the connections are probably the clearest, there's been plenty of reporting from LRA defectors that the Lord's Resistance Army, that there were directives to get ivory to help fund their activities. So to the extent to which any one group is profiting is unclear, but when you have this much money flowing through criminal networks, the odds are that some of that is finding its way to really bad actors. So.
Well, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Gatchell.
you.
Well, Mr. Will Gatchell is a policy expert with the World Wildlife Fund. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, the kings of food. A closer look at Malawi's funniest music duo. Stay with us.
to present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
Welcome back. It's time for Friday Music Makers segment, and today we'll take you to Malawi to meet Simon and Kendall, Malawi's funniest music duo. Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell met up with them and is here to tell us all about it. Now, who are these guys?
They are funny, and they are great musicians. They're funny storytellers, and their music videos are just terrific. They're favorites in Malawi.
There's something they like to sing about. Tell us about that, and then we can introduce the video.
Food.
Just food.
They love food, and they love to sing about food, and it's fun.
And this is what they're going to do right now. Let's watch this video.
Kwikoyanga konseka chaka chino kuli kudya mwina lelo ndi mpunga mwina mawa ndi nyama konseka kwiko konseka konseka kwiko konseka kwikoyanga iwe konseka maitiyele kwiko konseka wanala kwa kwiko konseka aiferele
Heather, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Now, to learn more about Heather Maxwell and her VOA show, visit Facebook and type in the keywords Music Time in Africa and find out what time a radio program can be heard in your area and get more information about some of our featured artists. Now, it's time for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a monkey with a great sense of style steals the spotlight on the red carpet. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Why are Sony Pictures executives groveling for forgiveness? Well, Sony Pictures was the target of a massive cyber attack that became public last month by an unidentified hackers who released a trove of internal company data and emails. In an exchange with Sony Pictures Entertainment co-chairman Amy Pascal, high-powered producer Scott Rudin referred to Angelina Jolie as a minimally talented, spoiled brat. The Hollywood heavyweights also joked about the type of movies Obama might like, mentioning films with African-American themes or stars. Some say the emails are racially insensitive, and Pascal and Rudin were quick to issue apologies. Well, next up, a fashionable monkey steals the spotlight on the red carpet. Ben Stiller may have had top billing in Night at the Museum, Secret of the Tomb, but Crystal, the monkey, was the big draw at the movie's New York premiere. Crystal's character in the museum movie is named Dexter. She was the first celebrity to arrive on the red carpet dressed in a tuxedo and posed for photos, posing for a break now and then for a quick treat from a trainer, and even catching a ride on co-star Rebel Wilson's shoulder. Night at the Museum, Secret of the Tomb premieres on December 19th, and that is what is trending today. Well, time now for sports. VOA Sunny Young talked with three colleagues about recent developments in the National Basketball Association.
Okay, let's talk some basketball. NBA, we're now about 1/4 of the way through the season. And when I look at the standings, some traditional royalty in terms of the teams, not at the top. Is that an aberration or what?
I mean, I think it's a unique season. I mean, there's a lot of changes with the draft. A lot of teams have re-upped and really fought for their new place in this season. I think anything can happen at this point.
Right. Things have changed around. You know, we have some new kids on the block who are rolling the NBA. I think there's been that traditional shift in we're seeing right now in the NBA. I think, you know, the older teams like the LA Lakers, who are traditionally for the last decade been dominating.
They're at the bottom.
They're at the bottom now.
Exactly. I won't be surprised if at the end of the season we find out that this is real change, because the teams, the lowly teams that used to be low, who are leading the conferences now, have taken time to get there.
I mentioned basketball royalty. King James, LeBron James of the Cleveland Cavaliers. As we talk, they've won 8 games in a row. But let's go back to Brooklyn. when he met British royalty, Prince William and his wife Kate. Your reaction?
This is royalty meeting royalty, okay? I know there's been talk about him having committed a faux pas by putting the hand of the Duchess of York, but you know, it's King James, he could do whatever he wants.
She was just dwarfed by Kate. He's like, and she's like, so small.
I think it was a good treat, you know. It was a good treat to see the royalty from UK, you know, meeting King James. And if you recall, they were sitting beside Dikembe Mutombo.
That's right. It wasn't all fun and games in Brooklyn. There were protests outside the arena going back to the shooting by white police officers of unarmed black men in both Ferguson as well as, I think, in Staten Island, New York. And LeBron, during the pregame warm-ups, wore an I Can't Breathe T-shirt, and it has since been worn by some of the other big stars in the NBA, like Kobe Bryant,
the whole Lakers team.
Yes.
Actually, Kevin Durant, I think.
Kevin Durant, you have to give credit to Derrick Rose as well, because he was the first guy to do it. So.
Derrick Rose is the one who started it, and I think it's okay for, you know, sports figures to show their social protests. You know, a lot of times people try to separate politics and sports, but really you cannot. No. I mean, these things are all, you know, engaged. So there was nothing wrong with it.
Absolutely. Also, you know, it's very important to note that the NBA has decided not to fine these players for wearing that, because they recognize the First Amendment rights of these players, how important their voice is to this very seminal moment in history of...
All right, let's go to the court. Golden State Warriors, I mean, they have to be maybe the surprise team in the NBA right now under new coach Steve Kerr. 18 wins out of their first 20 games.
You know, I will correct you there. Yeah. I wouldn't say they are a surprise team.
Absolutely.
They've been building up. Last season they did very well. This season they are picking up from where they left last season. So it's a team that has been building up. And, of course, the coming of Steve Kerr, the coach.
How much credit do you give Kerr?
I give him a lot of credit, because Golden State team is an exciting team. It's a shooting team. And Steve Kerr, when he played, he was a shooting player.
Well, guys, that's all the time we have for today here in the Sports Box. I'm VOA Sonny Young, thanking Jeremiah, Jackson, and Wamoyo. See you next time here in the Sports Box.
Well, that's Sonny, and that's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. If you have ever heard American English, you might have heard this.
Cut to the chase.
What does this mean?
Stop with all the details and cut to the chase. What university are you attending in the fall? I'm going to Syracuse. That's great. Congratulations.
Cut to the chase means to say what's important without delay. Just get to the point. It's like saying, I want only the important information now. This phrase started in Hollywood when silent movie directors said, cut to the chase, usually after a romantic scene. Now, when you use cut to the chase, you can say it with a happy or an angry voice, depending on your mood. And that's English in a Minute.